advantage of it, right? And I think that's probably one of the lessons I took away from that moment is that when opportunities present themselves, just take them, right? You never know, right? You never know if it's going to be the right fit, if it's going to be the thing for you, but it's an opportunity, right? That opportunity sometimes can lead you in a lot of different directions.
Welcome to Breaking Barriers of Black Investors, where we explore the inspiring stories of successful Black investment professionals and share the strategies for breaking down barriers in the asset management industry. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. In today's show, I welcome Joe Smith, founder and chief investment officer at Parti Pris Investment Partners, an investment firm that makes it easier for financial advisors to offer personalized, tax-aware portfolios that builds clients' wealth. Joe, welcome to the show.
Denard, thanks for having me.
It's great. It's great to have you here. I mean, I've been tracking you for the last, 3 years now. So
Yeah, man, it's been about 3-4 years.
So for those that don't know, a few years back, I was actually looking for people of color who had accomplished a CFA designation. It was just mostly for inspiration for me to continue to pursue that route. And I came across Joe Smith, and I noticed that he was doing a phenomenal things within the investment space, and he started his firm, and he had the CFA designation. So I figured, let me go ahead and reach out to this brother, and just keep it, just to follow along his track in terms of what he was doing and what he continued to do. And thus far, he's been doing really great. Definitely wanted to make sure that he had the chance to share his story in the podcast, and he finally gave me the opportunity to highlight his story. So I'm very thankful of that, and I can't wait.
Yeah, man, I gotta apologize because COVID hit. I'm in the middle of New York City. It was just surviving a pandemic. There might have been some folks I might have not gotten back to on LinkedIn, so I'm just gonna apologize up front. Like, that was totally my bad.
And for those who haven't got a response from Joe, look, it's coming soon.
Very soon. In fact, very soon.
So Joe, I want to start at the very beginning where the journey started for you. First, where are you from, and tell us a little bit about your early childhood.
Yeah, so we'll take you back to the beginning. I'm originally from Colorado Springs, Colorado, but I've probably lived almost everywhere you can possibly think of. So I was born in Colorado Springs. My father was in the military for about almost 20 years or so. So we moved around quite a bit. So I actually remember starting school and growing up in Kaiserslautern, Germany, which was before they actually brought down the wall. So I was in West Germany, started at a German school, spoke German fluently. I don't anymore, but was there for a number of years. And then my folks, they came back to the States, moved around a little bit, back to Colorado, and then finally relocated up to the great rainy Pacific Northwest.
So you spoke German for a while, right? And I'm kind of, how in the world do you lose that language? I feel like it's such a unique language to learn and so difficult. And you had to mess that up, huh?
I messed it up. I got back to the States. I had no one to speak with, and it just kind of slipped. So, but it was a unique experience in the fact that I think kind of for my early childhood and my education, I had a very different perspective, right? So I lived on a military base, folks from all over the United States. At the same time, though, we all interacted with our, German colleagues and friends, right? So going to a German school, it gave you that perspective that there's a world outside of the United States, number one. And number two, I think by that point, people just genuinely they want to accept you for who you are, right? Doesn't regardless of your background, your ethnicity, kind of, where you're coming from. And so for me, that was my first couple of years of my childhood. It was really that experience overseas. Didn't know much about, how life was like back in the States till we moved and I could remember it. So, man, I'll tell you, it just, it was a blessing in disguise in a lot of ways.
That makes a lot more sense because in some of your prior podcasts that you've been in, and some of your posts, you always emphasize inclusion, right? And I think that had to do with the idea of, how you had to navigate your area, especially when you were moving from places to places. Um, Now, you said that it is a, now looking back, you see it as a blessing now, but how did you feel at that time where you've never been at one place for, a period of time, you always moving? Like, how was that like?
So at the time, I would say growing up, it was tough, right? You don't understand why you're constantly being ripped from your friends, going to a new place. For all military families, that's the life, right? Your family's there to serve, right? And so for me, I think that what I was fortunate enough to have was that parents that realized that that would impact kind of my upbringing at some point. So the decision to settle in the Pacific Northwest, my father decided to retire from the military to give us a little bit more stability. And it just kind of helped me settle in, at that young age to really kind of just focus on like who I wanted to develop into, what type of friends I wanted to have, what type of things I wanted to do. And so that was, I would say, the the light at the end of the tunnel, right, if you will, in terms of kind of as we transition from that to really just focusing on just being where we were. So
So how old were you when you actually settled in?
yeah, that's a good question. So by the time we settled, I was probably about 9 or 10, right? So a funny story relative towards all of that was when my folks moved back from Germany to the U.S. We lived for a little bit with my grandparents in Colorado, and I went to school out there for like only like the last part of the year. And it was weird because I came back, and the very first thing the school said is like, I'm at least like a grade or two ahead of everyone else, right? So they can either place me in fourth grade or they can just hold me back a year, right? And I think for my folks, they were more concerned about kind of the social difference of me being about 2 years younger than the rest of my classmates. So that piece of it was nice when we finally moved up to Washington State, and that didn't have to worry about that kind of weird dynamic of like, okay, hey, I don't know anyone. I'm being placed in the kind of this whole special situation, and I don't even know how to like navigate it. So that you don't think about those things as a kid. You just kind of worried about, hey, am I cool enough to fit in, right?
I mean, a lot of time, right? Especially around that age, around that 10, 11-year mark, I truly consider that to be the age when you really start to remember some of the significant things that happened to you, right? Because
Yeah.
everything prior to that is like, now I don't remember. That's when you probably had your first crush. That's when you probably had your first girlfriend or whatever it was. Uh, Now, throughout all those years, right, from I don't know, before 10, maybe 10 years old, and throughout your high school, what are some of the things and some of the memories that have truly stood out to you?
So a couple things that stood out to me. One, the first time I ever watched football. I don't know why I remembered this, but it was the Dallas Cowboys playing somebody. I had no idea how the rules worked. I saw this guy score a touchdown. I just thought, okay, the only way you score a touchdown if someone throws you the ball in a very specific location in the end zone. That was it. That was my understanding of football. I had no idea of why so many people in America probably still hate the Dallas Cowboys to this day. I didn't understand any of it. Another kind of funny memory is that I always remember with like my grandfather, he would take me to the grocery store, and specifically at the grocery store, you remember those little like you know little kitty things they have for you to play on or jump on, and you put in a dime, a quarter, or
At the
whatever
grocery
whatever it
store?
was, right? And yeah,
Oh man,
man, at the
you were.
grocery
I tell
store.
you what, you were at a better spot than I was. I didn't have none of that. I tell you that.
Yeah, so yeah, it's yeah, I mean, that memory was always kind of fond to me because it was just a lot of bonding between myself and my grandfather when I was younger. And I would say before that point, the other thing I remember was always just being outside, running around, playing with my grandparents' dog, climbing trees. So I just kind of was just get into stuff. That was usually my mo.
Sorry for all the guys who or girls who love football. I mean, he totally destroyed that.
Yeah,
I mean, are
yeah,
you a football fan
exactly.
now, or do you play
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, I played ball in high school. I wish I could have played in college. I watched football Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Doesn't matter when or whenever. That's my thing. My wife, fortunately enough, loves it too.
Oh,
So
that's cool. I tell you what, Joe. Like football, like I'm a basketball person, basketball and boxing, but basketball is my number one sport, right? And
yeah,
I could play basketball, I could watch it on television, but I prefer going to a football game over a basketball game, right? The
yeah,
atmosphere is just a lot more different, right? I mean, you could truly feel like the haters and the fans. I mean, they let you know, hey, we don't like the Cowboys, right? And then you go back home and
yeah.
you watch the television, you get more haters telling you they don't like the Cowboys. So, uh, yeah, so I'm in the same boat around the football that, at least at that time, right? Not really understanding it, but enjoy watching it because it's just a little bit more fun and a little bit more dynamic when you watch it in real life. You've lived, with your parents. Of course, you live with your parents at that time, and then you make a transition to having your grandparents in your life. Now, with all these pieces in your life, well, who did you look at the most as being the role model?
Yeah. So I would say it was a couple of folks, right? So I'll give you. So what happened post 10, right? Where you move up to Washington State and how that all comes into play. So first and foremost, my own father was probably one of my biggest role models. I think that for me specifically, he instilled a lot of values as related to hard work, the value of education, and understanding just how to find a way to be successful. Success could be little things. I mean, he would always talk about it. You can be as successful by the smallest things, making up your bed, shining your shoes, doing your chore, like just little things. And he always would describe it as those little things can add to even bigger things, and those bigger things added to something more from there. So, I will say that I was fortunate enough to have a father that was very involved with my upbringing, right? And just kind of guiding me through a lot of those kind of early, kind of youthful events, if you will. um, so that's kind of one piece. The second is that, so coincidentally, when I moved up to Washington, and back in the day, I mean, I don't know what it is like for kids growing up today, but like, I remember back in the day, I actually used to be outside for a good
Oh
portion of
man,
it. I'm that old. I'm just coming out and say.
and we're right around the
And
same age,
so,
so no worries.
yeah, yeah, no worries. But I don't mean that as a diss to anybody. If you got kids now and anything else, I'm just gonna say, the video games were a little bit more limited back then than they are now. So, but when I moved up here, my folks, they bought a house and everything else, and then there was these kids that lived down the street that we went to the same school, and then we just got really close. We would hang out together. They either be playing over at my place. We play basketball in the driveway, or I'd be down at their place, and we be in their backyard. And you remember those old like Nerf guns, right? Yeah, we used to definitely hit that a lot. And funny thing that happened in the midst of all of that is, like, one day their mom was talking about my mom, talking about where they were both from, and they're like, "Oh, you're from Texas? Yeah, I'm from Texas. What part of Texas? Oh, I'm from Brenham, Texas." And they're like, "Oh, I'm from Brenham, Texas." And then they start comparing notes, and then come find out like they're extended family, right? Second cousins,
Wow.
man. And I was just like, okay, didn't see that coming, right? But like, just I guess that's the way kind of really interesting things happen, right? So I say all that though because my now my cousin's dad, he was another role model. His background was he became a colonel in the U.S. Army. was running. I remember when he got his command for Fort Sam Houston. That was, that was a big deal. When I went and watched that, but just the way he kind of conducted himself, the way he approached a lot of things, especially around education, it was just kind of another kind of inspiring kind of person to look up to. And I think my biggest thing with him though was always about integrity, right? And integrity where it's not just about you, it's about everybody else around you. It's about always doing the right thing, if you even if you don't stand to benefit from it, right, initially. And so for me, that was another role model that I could point to and say, hey, what, that's what I want to emulate in terms of kind of behavior as well.
So, like you mentioned, right, he emphasized the importance of education. And, you decided to go to the University of Washington. So tell me a little bit more about that experience when you first got there.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna say it right now. If anybody out there is listening and you're living in the state of Washington, if you're from Seattle, wherever, I'm just gonna come out and say it right now. There's a little thing relative towards colleges up here that people are very competitive about. So when I was at that point or stage where I'm trying to figure out the whole go to college thing, everything else, honestly, I was first generation in my family, so I didn't really have much for a guide. And you talk to student counselors, and it's really hit or miss, right? You're gonna find somebody who's really invested in your future, someone who's like, okay, you're just someone on the list. I got to go through, give you the basics, and then move on. For me, though, I kind of had a couple things fortunately going for me. One, I was really, diligent on keeping my grades up, even in spite of, all the other things I had going on. I was playing football, I was running track, I was involved with a lot of student activities on campus during high school. And again, I had parents that like would threaten me with, with an inch of my life if my grades dropped below an A minus.
And that was a
So
motivation
that was
factor.
like motivating to the fact that one time it happened, I got a C on a midterm my freshman year, and my father threatened for me never to play football ever again if I didn't get my grades up in 2 weeks. So that's a motivating factor. But so back to the college front though. So for me, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. To be honest with you, I was just like, I just want to get in somewhere. I want to get a scholarship. That was my main focus. And coincidentally, though, and this kind of goes back to, you know, having advocates, right, for you at the end of the day. So I remember University of Washington wasn't even originally on my radar. I knew about it. I knew about the football program. I knew that it was spoken with really high prestige up here, but I had no idea. I was thinking like, oh, I want to go to Michigan. I want to go somewhere as far away from Washington State as I could get. Right, that was my only consideration towards picking a school. And it was funny because the principal actually calls me in his office one day. I'm thinking, okay, what did I do? Like, I've done nothing. I've never been suspended. I've never gotten into trouble. I don't even know what this is about. And he brings me in his office and he says, hey, so I've got you scheduled to go do a campus tour at the University of Washington. And the point of the tour is really for them to see if you have interest in possibly attending the school. They have scholarships attached with it, academic scholarships. You were nominated by myself, and a couple of your teachers that really believe that you have what it takes to be at that next level. So I thought to myself, okay, hey, I'll go check this out. This seems cool and everything else. I get there, I get on campus, and if you've ever had one of those moments, you walk into some place and you're just like, okay, this is it.
Hmm.
This is where I want to
Yep.
be. It was that, like, the moment I stepped on campus, it was, in a lot of ways. I mean, it's kind of one of these places where it seems magical because it's got a very old school feel to it. You got the gargoyles on the buildings, and the libraries all have this like Harry Potter feel. I don't even know how to describe it now, uh, but so for me, I was like, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do, and they were like, okay, this is your process you have to go through for applying. You're still held at the same standard as all other applicants, right? If you get in though, you'll also get this academic scholarship that covers, effectively 4 years of your tuition, right? And I was thinking back in my head, I was like, that's great because right now I don't have the money to pay for this. But little did I know though, so I go through the whole process. I'm waiting to hear something. I apply to other schools. And when I finally got that letter, it was like a sigh of relief. But I just thought of it, like, oh, okay, yeah, I was expected to go there, so I'm going. Right, that was it. And I talked to a bunch of my other classmates, and I remember this specifically the night that they at the high school they did this whole announcement. So, okay, who's going where, and make it a big celebration. So out of the 250 kids at the class, or in my class in high school, a portion of them, made it to college, which I always kind of wish now those numbers been a little bit higher. But of the class, I was in the top 10% of the class. But mind you, academically, that meant I was 25th. Right? I'm a long line. Like, there's a long line of people who have even better grades than I do. And I'm like thinking, like, I got a 3.8 GPA. Like, what's the problem here? And of that, though, I find out that I'm maybe one of four people that got in at
Wow.
the University of Washington. Like, our four valedictorians didn't get in. Like, it was myself, two other people I knew, and somebody else I really didn't know. And I was like shocked a little bit to kind of find that out. But then, later on, you find out from admissions, like, hey, like grades are one thing, but like complete, well-rounded individuals
Mm,
another, right? And so for me, I think that the whole process in itself, it's daunting because for folks like us, sometimes you just don't have
of
that guide,
course.
right? You don't know what are the things you really need to be doing. I just coincidentally just had been doing them and didn't realize it. Right? And then when the opportunity presented itself, I just took advantage of it, right? And I think that's probably one of the lessons I took away from that moment is that when opportunities present themselves, just take them, right? You never know, right? You never know if it's going to be the right fit, if it's going to be the thing for you, but it's an opportunity, right? That opportunity sometimes can lead you in a lot of different
And that's a
directions.
valuable lesson that you learn, especially, that early on, before even starting your career, right? Is taking advantage of opportunity. Now, obviously, now going through the whole university process, right? What I want to know is how did you prepare yourself academically to take advantage of opportunity after you graduated?
So, man, that's a tough one because I will say, I'm going to tell you right now, like, I didn't know what to take advantage of, right? To be honest with you,
That's
like,
most
I
of
was
us.
I was like, I just got in. That's good enough for me, right? I'm just gonna show up and I'm gonna figure this out. Like, oh, this is like bigger than high school. That's all I knew. And when I got on the campus and went through my first I think they had them as like mini quarters or trimesters, whatever it may have been. I got my teeth kicked in, right? I literally like I I remember specifically there was this like microeconomics. Like I already had told myself, oh, I want to be an economics major. I want to like do stuff in the business school and everything else. Intro to microeconomics. Midterm comes around. I got killed. I got a, like a I was averaging like a 2.5 GPA in that class. And I remember calling home, calling my folks. I'm like, this isn't for me. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, I don't know how I can tough this out. And my dad was like, son, you got 3.5 years left on that scholarship. You better make sure you finish and get out of there with your degree. And it was the first time that I probably experienced that kind of notion around adversity, right? And how do you think about responding? And for me, like there was as I found out, oh, there's resources on campus, especially for students of color on campus that I just wasn't tapping into, right? And I don't know what it was. I just kind of was like, I don't need that. I'm good. And it was a humbling experience for me to realize, like, nobody gets through anything in life without help. Like, I don't care. You could be Elon Musk level genius, right? At some point, somebody will help you, right? And so that was the first time like I had to really kind of change my approach on a lot of things. It was my study habits, the way I went about my business on campus academically, how I balanced out my time between that and socializing, being able to kind of do other fun activities on campus. And it just took that time to really kind of make that adjustment and then realize, hey, you're on campus with 40,000 students who are just as good, if not better, than you are academically, right? And that doesn't mean you stay there. It just means that you got to work a lot harder at it. So for me, that was kind of the biggest kind of piece or adjustment. And then from there, it just once I made that adjustment, it really came down towards like reaching out and getting out of my shell and just kind of connecting with more people.
I'm gonna tell you this, Joe. I feel like my microeconomics or macroeconomics fuck up a lot of people, including myself. I'm not kidding you. I think at the beginning, right? I mean, now looking back, because we both got the CFA, we could, it's obviously one of those topic that was discussed throughout the whole program. But over time, it gets a lot easier to understand. But at the beginning, I feel like it's one of those things that is so difficult to grasp, right? Supply, demand, cycles, everything, how everything comes together, policies, and all the theories. And the funny part about it is that even though that was the topic that challenged you at the beginning, you end up getting a bachelor in it. So
Yeah,
look how things work.
yeah, yeah. Which kind of points back to when you face adversity. Sometimes just more so about enduring, right, and getting to that next step. And for me, it was by that second trimester, I'm like, all right, I had a terrible experience with microeconomics. I take my macroeconomics course, and then I just excelled. It was like, it clicked, right? It's like, oh, okay. I see why I was going through all that grueling aspect on the micro end, macroeconomics. This is a lot cooler. I can connect this with things that I think about, especially with things I wanted to do career wise on the investment front. And, I just think that one other lesson I learned too is that don't take yourself so seriously, right? I, you know, I think a lot of times for folks like us, we come in and we're always like, okay, hey, I got to just be on my A game. I got to make sure that I'm taking care of my business every single day. And for me, like my college experience kind of taught me that don't take yourself seriously. Like there were at some point I finally realized like, hey, I need to just take some classes to really just enjoy being in college, right? Doesn't have to be kind of primarily focused on my major and everything else. So I was taking things like history of jazz, like introduction to meteorology, um, history of architecture, right? It was just like off the wall things like that. Now I look back, I'm like, I'm so happy I took those because it's just kind of exposing myself to something new. But I think those things were really kind of what helped me to kind of just refresh and get myself ready to jump back into the work I know I still needed to do.
We're gonna definitely review that architectural side later on in the podcast, but beforehand, obviously the college was a micro, was a micro part of your life, and then now looking at the macro, right? Not necessarily had to do with your life, but more within the economy. You graduated during the time where the economy was not doing so well. Well, it was at the beginning of the decline, right? During the
Yeah.
credit crisis of 2006. That was the beginning of it. And then it really started to pronounce during 2007 and 2008. What I want to know is what were some of the challenges you faced before landing a position at Russell Investment as an associate portfolio analyst?
Yeah, so I had a really interesting experience getting to Russell, what was then the Frank Russell Company, way back when. So I actually started when I was in college as an intern at Russell, and I, got the internship through a nonprofit called Inroads. If you know what Inroads is all about, so Inroads is, their mission is basically to place, talent, especially in terms of people from multiple backgrounds, people of color, into Fortune 500 and multinational national companies to see if there's better opportunities to get more diverse kind of candidates right in the door at those places. And so that was kind of my path as to how I found myself at Russell Investments. Now, interesting story with that. My first year there, I started. I was in the investment group, but I was in kind of the least sexiest part about the investment group, which was like basically focused on manager contracts and compliance. That would like, if anybody knows what Russell Investment does, they are a world leader, multi-manager investing. They pride themselves on having deep expertise, finding the best money managers in the world, and building portfolios around that thesis. And so for me, like I started in this area, I'm like, I don't know how I would ever use this. I'm sitting here by a copy machine every day and everything else. I'm sharing a desk with another intern outside an office. I'm like, what's going on here? And funny thing though is that and why I've kind of fell in love with the place when I got there was that I remember by day 3, the office that I was sitting right outside of in this cube with another intern, the gentleman who actually had that office finally came back from where they were on the road. And he just said, "Hey, good morning. My name's Tom." Just introduces himself, goes about his business. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Nice guy and everything else. And I remember that there was a happy hour event that was supposed to be happening like after work for everybody on the floor. But I had to stay back and like finish, making copies of some contracts for someone. And so I'm sitting there by like a copy machine just making these prints like for 2 hours. And an hour into it, I remember that he comes into the copy room and he says, "Oh, hey, yeah, I'm Tom. I know I introduced myself earlier. My name's Tom. Like, what's your name? Like, what school are you currently attending?" Started asking me a lot of questions about what I thought about, my experience, so far, working there as an intern and everything else. And then proceeds to just lightly help me with what I was working on. And I'm like, this is a really nice guy. Like, I can't believe this. I come to find out then, like the next day, right? Someone finally tells me, "Hey, Joe, by the way, Tom is Tom Hanley. He's the global chief investment officer for Russell
Wow.
Investments." And I was just like, I was taken back by that. I was like, for somebody to take interest in me at that level, like really kind of just opened my eyes that, there's good people in this business, right? That, no matter how far or how high they go, they can be extremely humble about what they do. And so that was kind of my initial kind of foray in terms of working at Russell. When I finished school, I had wanted to sign on just as a full time analyst. I originally didn't get that offer. I ended up working for probably about less than a year or so with
Hmm.
Accenture as a consultant. Consulting is a lot of interesting things. Systems integration consulting was not my thing.
Yeah.
It was like I miss my passion and everything else. And fortunately, though, again, talk about people looking out for you. There was an older gentleman that I had gotten close with during my internship named John Christofferson. Funny story is John is like the original creator of the Russell style
Hmm.
indexes. And so I remember that a position had opened up in the group I ultimately got hired into, and they were asking for someone, hey, 10 years of experience, like all these accolades and everything else. And he told me, hey, you know what? You should apply anyways. And I'm like, I have no experience. I'm like straight out of school. What do you want me to do? And I remember specifically that I got the interview. I interviewed with a woman out of Canada. Her name was Kelly Fairbanks. And Kelly told me, it's like, hey, so John actually put my resume in front of you and told me that one of the biggest hires I could ever make strategically for this company would be to hire you.
Wow.
And so I'm going to hire you. And it's going to be tough. You're going to come in, you're going to work hard. But if he believes that this is something I should do, I'm just going to do it. So I step into this group, and mind you, this group has like 13 PhDs and like I'll call it like I used to joke like the group I was working with and almost felt like the Jedi Council of the entire firm. They were like there was force users and they were force users, right? Just to give you a little sci-fi joke there. But you know, I'm working in this group. I'm working for a gentleman by the name of Steve Murray, and he was probably the smartest person in the entire group, right? Humble guy and everything too. And I'm doing everything from jumping in on how they do strategic forecasting in terms of capital markets assumptions to like optimizations on retirement income portfolios. Like it was just all over the place, right? But it was a great opportunity to learn and kind of just suck in things. And I will just say career wise, like so talk about, '08 and the timing of it. So in the middle of all this, I get, really curious, interested, started looking at this thing called a ETF, exchange traded
Hmm.
fund. The firm collectively, like people did not want to be in that business at that point in time. We were in that business only because we had an index business that licensed all of our ETFs to BGI, which was effectively
Okay.
iShares, right? And I think the genesis of it was like they did it as kind of like, okay, hey, these guys asked for this, why
Hmm.
not? Like they'll never make money. Was the response of some folks. But fast forward the clock, I kind of got really big in terms of following the industry, understanding kind of what was going on. And '08 was kind of interesting timing because obviously the markets were what they were, Bear Stearns, mortgage market, everything else failing. And at the same time, like the ETF business, like saw its like most substantial growth ever up to that point, right, in terms of net inflows. And so I got really curious about it. I started advocating internally. Folks were like, "Hey, dude, go over there. Like you're supposed to be part of the investment group. Like we only do active management here. Like this is not what we do." And sure enough, like I had the most interesting opportunity come up, which some people say, "Hey, this is crazy. Like, why'd you do it?" But it was a growth opportunity, which was 2009. I get laid off, but at the same like on the same day, someone asked me, "Hey, you know what? Here's the deal. We'll make you a deal. If you can prove out a global business case for the firm to be in the ETF business, you'll not only get your job back, but you'll be able to join this team, go off, and help us grow it." And I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" I'm like 21, 22 years old. I'm like, what do I have to lose? Like, I'm in the middle of trying to apply to iShares and try to move to San Francisco anyways, right? So why not? And I bring all this up because like when people talk about challenges, is that one of my biggest challenges was how was I going to network inside this massive organization and get enough people to buy into the concept where by the time I got presented back to the powers that may be at work, it was something that folks could say, okay, yeah, we'll do this, right? And I was starting from a case of I've never written a business case before. I've never taken on something like this. And interesting thing that happened was I got paired with my former manager that I was working with as an intern, right? Back pre-days contracts compliance, right? But guess what? She knew how to put together business plans, right? And so was working on that. Actually, at that time too, just to kind of backtrack, is that in the midst of all this, I met my current business partner and co-founder of Parti Pris, a gentleman by the name of Art Latronic. And Art is like one of these people who I will say kind of brought out a side in me during all of that I didn't think I had. Right? He's built businesses. He helped grow Fidelity Strategic Advisors. He started Morningstar Investment Services, what's now Morningstar Investment Management. And so he's been a builder of businesses, like successful businesses as well. And so him and I, we tag team in a lot of this, right? Trying to figure out, okay, hey, how do we do this? How do we go about this? And by the time it was all said and done, like it really came down to the business, like for the firm, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And for folks to realize, okay, hey, there's an evolution that's going on in our business, and we need to be a part of that. I think was kind of critical and key. And so when they approved it, I was jumping for joy. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can have a formal job again. Number one. Number two, like I can do something that I really enjoy and what I love, right? Which was and something I never had the opportunity to do so before, which was product
That's
development,
awesome.
right? So that was kind of the adversity and kind of challenges working through that, right? And challenges lead to new opportunities and new challenges
So
from
let's
that.
kind of recap on that, right? While you was in college, right, you had an internship at Russell, and while you were there, you came across this gentleman that took the time and just give you his time, right? And later on, you realized that he was someone that was high up within the culture, the corporate hierarchy, and that created a level of confidence, a level of I don't know, wow, this guy took the time and noticed me, right? So that gave you a different, another level of boost. Ultimately, it did not get the job right after graduating. You work shortly at an investment firm as a consultant, right, doing system integration.
Yeah, it's like systems integrations.
Came
Yeah.
back, got a role, right? Now that that's what I'm talking about. One of the things that you mentioned, right, is opportunity, right? Taking advantage of opportunity when it came. You were given an opportunity, right, to come in into a role where you did not have the experience, and I'm sure that you probably felt uncomfortable because you knew that you didn't have the experience, but that person gave you the opportunity for you to showcase what you're capable of, and ultimately you did well, got laid off, but you got back right very quickly, right,
Yeah.
very quickly. Met your business partner along the way, right, and then you became, a product specialist within the ETF space, essentially. Um,
Yeah.
Now, did I get everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it. Yeah, you got it. Like, and in the midst of all of that, you know, I moved to San Francisco. They bring in a team, ironically from iShares to run our ETF business. I learned a lot from those folks, right? Many of them I'm still very close with today, right? We catch ourselves, we catch each other at conferences and things like that. But I will tell you from that experience alone, my single greatest thing that I would tell anybody is like, don't give up. Don't give up on your hopes, your dreams, the things you aspire to do, because I think it's so easy for us to take no as like the final word, right? And in my case, I'm someone that like I'll keep coming back and knocking on that door until someone finally gives me a yes, right? It could be I'm knocking 1,000 doors. The 1,001 door that I knock on could be the one that changes all of it.
Real quick, we hope you're enjoying the episode and your support would mean the world to us. If you find value in breaking barriers of Black investors, we kindly ask you to take a moment to rate and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also encourage others to join our empowering community. Thank you. Now, throughout that time, right? I mean, you worked at Russell, and then you later on got a role at Charles Schwab. You've obviously developed, a lot of skill sets, and maybe perhaps some unique skill sets, right? Both technical and soft skills. Now, from the top of your mind, in terms of the ones that are, high level skill set, can you highlight to me some of those skill sets that you developed that you believe that are high level and you still use to this day?
Yeah. So, I think along the way, the things that I figured out, just to kind of highlight, in terms of skill sets, is that to really be successful in the investment business, or specifically on Wall Street, you've got to understand the business in its totality and all the players that are involved to make it successful. So, I've done everything from product development, product management, risk management, portfolio management, um, some light level of sales, right, in terms of more of a client support role. All those things I think gave me better perspective as to how to do my job better, especially as an investor, right? Schwab was a unique experience for me because I don't think people realize is that their culture is really ingrained on being on the front lines with customers, right? Even if you work in corporate, there's still an expectation that at least some point over the course of the year, you go work for a day or two or a week in one of the Schwab branches, right? You meet with customers just like everybody else. And for me, those experiences, I got out to Arizona to go sit in at one of their call centers, meet folks, sit on active calls with clients. That perspective gives you kind of, for me at the time, it gave me a perspective of the retail investment world. It's very different than what you would see like with more institutional clients, but it matters a lot more, right? You got to realize that a lot of folks that if they have anything invested, it's their life savings, right? It's all they have, right? And they want to make sure they're being taken care of. They can rest well at night. They don't have to worry about the things that they would like to do versus what they have to do, right? You can make sure that they're getting the right solutions for that. And so for me, it was a humbling experience from a more of an intellectual standpoint that every problem doesn't need to be as sophisticated as many of us may perceive in order to give somebody the right answer. So Schwab was, a wonderful experience for me before business school. Again, another thing that similar kind of vein with Russell is like, there's always folks that are looking out for you, right? And in my case, it was, my boss's boss who worked there. He was really a gentleman by the name of John Sturiali. He was really big on making sure we were always doing the right thing for clients no matter what. Every decision we made was about clients. And, even when I left, he was gracious enough to say, hey, if you ever want to come back, just give me a call. Right. And, again, that kind of put confidence in me to be like, okay, hey, am I delivering value? Well, yeah, like someone can see it. Right. And sometimes, again, it's like, you, I hate to say it, you may need that validation because sometimes you're not quite sure. Like, are you hitting the mark? Are you way off? Like, does someone see your worth relative towards kind of the function you're performing, etc.
Of course. And before we move towards the time frame of business school, just to provide some context to the audience, and it's and I think when I was doing my research on you and I was looking at it, I was actually amazed by the level of progression that you had. So Joe graduated, right, with a bachelor in economics, and all that he just said happened within a 6 year time frame, guys. Right, that investment happened within a 6 year time frame, advancing all the way to a manager and product specialist, and then he decided to go ahead and pursue an MBA at Carnegie Mellon. My question is, why did you decide to pursue an MBA?
So it was. I think it was more of a timing thing, right? It was. There was one aspect in my career where I was like, I wanted to make that next jump towards running money and portfolio management. There was another aspect relative towards what I had seen just being in the business that in order to make that type of jump really would require for me to like hone in more of my technical skills from where they were. Um, and I think there was a third element too that I observed through my experiences both at Russell and Schwab that kind of always led me back to soft skills are equally, if not more important than the ones you bring up front, right? Relative towards those technical hard skills, if you will. And so for me, the decision to go to business school was largely driven by that. And again, how I ended up at Carnegie Mellon was like kind of I won't say sheer happenstance, but the gentleman that I had worked for who ran the ETF business when I was at Russell was a Carnegie Mellon grad. And as I was explaining to him, hey, this is what I want to go do. What are your thoughts? He's like, hey, you should look at Carnegie Mellon, right? Like, and I was like, I've never heard of Carnegie Mellon. Where's this school? And he's like, oh, it's in Pittsburgh. And then the first thing I thought was like, okay, Steelers and very cold in December, right? Like, I'm in sunny California. Why do I want to do that, right? But coincidentally, I applied, got invited out there for an interview, and I think what drew me to the school was that Pittsburgh overall, like as much as it's grown, it's very tech heavy now, especially when you think about things like AI or autonomous driving vehicles, things like that. It's still at its roots a blue collar town, right? Like people pride themselves on being blue collar, middle, middle America, and really just kind of just enjoying the basic things that they need to get through their day, right? And for me, like that vibe alongside with like there's again like I'll joke Carnegie Mellon in a lot of ways is kind of like again the Hogwarts of Pittsburgh when it comes to universities. Like U Pitt's down the street, great school too. Duquesne University, great school too, right? But for me, what drew me there was like, hey, this program that definitely has a lot of the things I wanted to pursue in terms of kind of building up my technical skills, but with the twist of being that they also had just started this whole executive coaching program. And so you could get executive level coaching, right, to focus on those soft skills as well as in terms of kind of leadership development. And so that's what sold me on it. I resigned from my role at Schwab, packed my things up, moved out to Pittsburgh, and was like, okay, hey, let's see how this goes, right? And again, I don't think an MBA or grad school is for everyone. I think it's more so about having a clear understanding of your objectives of what you want to achieve in order to get to the next level.
And I have to say, Joe, right? I think you making that decision, and probably now you looking back, was probably one of the best decision you ever made. And I'm gonna say why, right?
Yeah.
In one of your prior podcasts, right? You mentioned it was at Carnegie Mellon where you met your wife, right? So talking about level of
Yeah.
significance, and and after graduating, you talked about the level of difficulty that you experienced. Just, she was in New York and you were, I believe, Omaha. And the challenges where you had to really put some level of emphasis in the importance of time management. Now, my question is, how did you manage that time?
So I think I'll say right off the bat is when you have great managers you work for, like some of those things can become a lot easier, right? Backstory towards how I ended up in Omaha, right, in the first place, right? We'll give some context on that too. Is that so coincidentally, and again, my now business partner, by that point, he had retired. He had basically moved to Boston and Martha's Vineyard. His daughter was finishing up school to go to Harvard. And I remember when I was in grad school, I called him because I was like, "Hey, I'm still in the middle of looking for an internship. I haven't found anything yet. Do you know anyone?" And he said, "Oh, you got to talk to this guy that I know at this firm called CLS Investments. He's the CIO there. His name's Rusty Vanneman." And he's like, "Oh yeah, Rusty's great. I hired him as an analyst at Fidelity when I was running strategic advisors. You should definitely talk to him." I get on the phone with Rusty. Anyone who knows Rusty Vanneman follows, some things he does, including his podcast, The Weighing Machine. He runs at a million miles per hour. Right? He's one of those people who like has infinite energy, right? In spite of and seems to have more energy as they get older, right? Not the other way around. And so I get on the call. I get on a call with him, introduce myself. Within like 15 minutes, he's like, "Hey, have you ever been to Omaha?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "You know what? Book a ticket, come out. Let's meet in person. I want you to meet the team. Like, see if this like could be of interest to you." And it's like, "Okay, sure, why not?" I go out to Omaha. He sells me on like, "Hey, come in as a consultant for the summer. Right? Just give me a shakedown on the investment process with my current team, meet folks, interact with management team and everything else." And he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna have you go out to lunch with CEO Todd Clark." I was like, "Oh yeah, sure. Like, why not?" Right. And when I got there, it's like, "Hey, beautiful building in Omaha, West Omaha." But I was like, "Okay, this is a different vibe, right?" But it's a cool vibe. And I go out to lunch with the CEO Todd, and I'm thinking like, okay, he's a CEO. He's probably gonna take me out to want to go out to some fancy restaurant. We get in his car. We drive like 5 minutes and pull up in front of like Firehouse Subs, and that's where we go to lunch. And I was like actually like, "Hey, this is cool." Like this guy, again, really high up, very humble, right? And it just was like great to have a conversation. Most of it wasn't even about business. It was just about, hey, where you grew up, you know, what are things important to you in life, et cetera, et cetera. And so I remember like, all that goes well. I go back to school, get a call like a few days later. Rusty calls me, "Hey, like, we want you to come out for an internship for the summer, right? Do this internship, perform this whole due diligence process on us, give a recommendation on 3 things we should change in terms of what we're doing, and we'll call it good." I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that." So I do that for a summer, right? And again, my then girlfriend, now wife, she was already in New York, so like my time management started immediately from there, right? So like figuring out scheduling weekends that I would fly back to New York, and thank goodness, as much as most people think Omaha is like, oh, it must be small town and everything else. Omaha's big enough to have direct flights
Oh
into every
man,
major city,
it's important.
right? Except Miami, right? That's like maybe the only one I couldn't get to directly, right? New York, direct, right? Seattle, direct. LA, almost direct, right? Chicago, definitely direct, right? But so my whole time management started there, like just us being committed to flying back and forth, seeing each other. And coincidentally, summer ends, give my recommendation. They love the recommendations that I made on kind of a few things that tweak and change. And then I was like, okay, hey, I'm going to go back to school and just kind of get back doing my thing. Get a call a month later. Oh, hey, how would you like to come out here and work for us? And I'm thinking like, okay, hey, I'm going to try and get a job in New York and everything else. And what sold me on it though was, Rusty was like, hey, you know what, you can come out, you run your own funds, you'll manage some of the analysts and portfolio managers, and I'll groom you to basically step into more of a CIO role, right? And I was like, okay, that's cool, right? That's cool. Like, again, opportunity, right? It's opportunity in places you don't always expect to find them. And so I move out there. I remember specifically when I moved because, like, you'll appreciate this as someone who's gone through the whole CFA process. So when I was finishing up school, I was actually one of those people who did a study abroad. So I was over in Germany for like 3 months, came back. I hadn't even like started really studying for CFA level 3. I was just like, okay, hey, I just need like I'll get this done when I get back. I graduate in May, like May 15th was my graduation date. May 18th, I flew out, like May 16th, I flew out to Omaha. Next day, right? All I have is a suitcase, one with like my clothes. The other suitcase has got like a mini TV, an Xbox, and like all my like critical books that I think I need for work, right? Books, like, oh, and by the way, I still need to study for the CFA exam. And so I move out there, get into my apartment. I've got no furniture, no nothing. And again, I just was like, all right, just manage the situation for what it is. Stuff comes, everything else. I'm studying then like crazy after hours for work for like 3 weeks for CFA level 3 to go sit for it. And my girlfriend comes out, or now wife, she comes out for the day I'm taking the exam so we can go celebrate, right? And I remember this exam because this was the last year they allowed you to leave early from the
Mm.
exam. Like, if you remember those days, they don't do that anymore. Right? If you're done, you've got to sit there. Right? I finished this exam by the afternoon. I'm like an hour and a half like
Mhm.
early. I get up, I leave. I come outside. My wife is like, "Hey, why did you leave so early?" And I was like, "Because I was done." Oh, you don't do that. You got to go back and check all your answers. I'm like, I checked them, and if I don't feel confident I passed, then I shouldn't be taking this exam in the first place. And the thing with it, like, just to kind of put this all in context, right? Time management is something that I think most folks will stop and say, I don't have the time. But time is really a function of whether or not you choose to make it the time, right? It's you can do all the things you want in life, but it really comes down towards how you understand you budget your time and what you have to prioritize with your time, right? And so my time in Omaha was amazing, especially with the team. Many folks now, we're all lifelong colleagues, friends, all play fantasy football together every single year. That's an intense process too in terms of drafting. But the thing that I always kind of took away from that whole experience was like really just finding ways to properly balance time, right? Having personal time, professional time. And again, it all comes back to taking opportunities that are in front of you, right? Because you never know where they can lead.
Of course, and I have to be honest with you. Time management, unless you've gone through the journey that we both went through, right? Starting the business, going through the CFA, having a girlfriend. Look, I used to do long distance dating, right? That's how my wife and I did it, right? So I was studying for the CFA, working full time, uh, traveling every month to go see her, and
Yep.
I don't think people would understand when we talk about the importance of time management around that time frame, right? But also the importance of truly understanding how to properly manage that time between personal and professional. Now, you obviously progress throughout your time at CLS, and I remember doing a prior podcast, you mentioned, or you said that Parti Pris, right, which is a term used for architecture. I said I was going to come back to it, right, was a term used at architectural that indicates a starting point of an idea before a building project is built. Now, what I want to know is what was the starting point when you realized you wanted to start your own investment firm?
Yeah, so I'll take you back to 2017, 2018, right? And so this is how it all comes together. So I'm over at CLS, and CLS, was basically the RA subsidiary of Orion Advisor Technology. I think they call themselves Orion Advisor Technologies, right? Successful fintech company, work with hundreds of RAs all across the country, right? And investment and thousands of investment advisors. And coincidentally, at that time, is that they started getting inquiries from various folks around this concept called direct indexing, or what's now called direct indexing, right? Basically, okay, index management within an SMA, right? Let's just call it like, let's just frame that in the context of what it really is. And so they decided they were going to build out some technology to support financial advisors with all of this. I'm as far away from this as possible, right? I'm worried about how do I make sure like my 4 or 5 star like international equity mutual fund like can continue to do its thing, right? And coincidentally, as a part of them deciding they're going to do this, they called up, ironically, my now business partner. And again, he was in retirement. He was just kind of enjoying life, fishing, everything else. They call him and say, "Hey, we really want to bring somebody in to build out this platform, and we hear from some of our partners you're the guy that knows how to do this, especially given that there's optimization technology involved with it." So he's like, "Yeah," and I get this phone call from him. He's like, "Hey, so guess who's coming back?" And I was like, "You?" He's like, "Yeah, guess where I'm going?" I'm like, "Where?" It's like, "I'm going to be in your neck of the woods at Omaha, in Omaha." I was like, "Oh, are you really going to come in and do this thing for these guys that are running?" He's like, "Yeah, absolutely." And so for me, that was the first time I was like, okay, this is an interesting thing that's going on over there. But like, again, I don't need to worry about this, right? That was kind of my thing at the time. Fast forward the clock though, as they started getting going, I think there was some realization that a lot of these advisors wanted this type of service, but they didn't want to do it themselves, right? They're like, "Hey, I love the technology. I love what it does. I love kind of the approach with it. I just, I want to spend more time still just focused on my clients, building my practice, right? Um, you know, Coaching clients through all their challenges and providing planning services. Can you guys run these type of style accounts for us?" And so I got involved because someone said, "Oh, hey, like Rusty and Joe can figure all that out. Oh, by the way, Joe is like one of the only people in the firm that like has used an optimizer before, right?" And they're like, "We've heard you run some of your portfolios with a portfolio optimizer." And I'm thinking back in my head, like, yeah, I do. I only have a concentration in operations research, right, to do that. But yeah, I can totally help out. So I get involved with this. They decide, hey, we're going to make this an outsourced service, right? Here's your team. Here's what you need to do towards kind of helping us get this all figured out. And again, as I started getting into this and I had conversations with the clients we were onboarding, I kind of had this aha moment, which was like, this is going to be the next big thing, right? And I haven't felt this excited about something since like the ETF business when I was involved with that. And so I just think to myself, I was like, you know what? And it's probably like 29 by 2019. There's some cool things about this, but I think the missing touch on it is kind of arriving at that solution that could be just as equally focused on the right execution of the technology as it is with the investment requirements in order to do it. And so I, most people say you're crazy whenever you decide to become an entrepreneur. I was probably crazy in the sense that so I resigned from my role over at Orion 3 weeks before my wedding, right? I was like, why not, right? Hey, best time of my life. Let me just kind of clear decks, kind of enjoy that and everything else. So I leave and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to start this, right? But let me get through all the wedding stuff and honeymooning and everything else. And so in late 2019, like, so pretty much we started Parti Pris, my business partner. It took me a year to convince him to go do this because he had already left Orion and everything else. But and I kind of joked with him, hey man, it's like if you ever seen the documentary Michael Jordan, like Phil Jackson, Last Dance, for all you '90s basketball fans out there, it's kind of a lot like that. And so when we get going, like the name, like everyone always like, well, how'd you guys come up with the name, right? And it's kind of a funny story. So the business itself is focused on helping advisors deliver personalized portfolios to clients, meaning that they build the portfolio and it's tailored around the client's needs, their requirements, their belief system, and unique to only them, right? Now, going back to my whole history of architecture class and everything else. So a party pre, as you mentioned, is basically kind of the design before the design, the idea that organizes your thoughts around what you want the design of a building to be. Most people associate this term with Frank Lloyd Wright, right? Especially the falling water house that out in Pennsylvania that people think about. And so, for us, when we said, hey, this is going to be the name of the business and everything else, we've always kind of seen ourselves as helping advisors come up with the design before the design for every single one of their clients, right? Helping them really think about how do you organize all these things that are going to be important for the client to say, yeah, this is the way I want my money invested. And to give them the tools and technology to support them on being able to scale and grow their business while deepening the conversations with the clients themselves. So that's a little bit kind of background, coincidentally too. I will admit like what really like I was noodling on this idea. And what was it that it kind of also, I'll give you kind of a hip hop reference. I thought of like, I then had like, I was running in Central Park and I had this idea also pop in relation to one of my favorite hip hop albums all time, which is The Blueprint 2, right? Don't ask me why. That was the random, like when this all formulated in my head, I was like, have my AirPods on, everything else. I'm running through the park and I'm just thinking about this. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's definitely going to be the
I
name of it.
almost thought you was gonna say Nas a little bit, but
Oh, man, that's a whole nother conversation. So,
I mean, but you know what? I want to congratulate you though. I mean, you 4 years deep, and you obviously went through some level of success and some level of difficulty and challenges along the way. Now, what I want to know is what were some of the challenges you faced since inception of the firm?
yeah, so I will tell anybody if you ever decide to go and become an entrepreneur, right? You've got to have a lot of endurance. And what I mean by that is, endurance can mean a lot of different things. It can mean everything from, hey, how are you going to actually fund this, to, hey, how am I going to acquire clients, to, hey, how do I get from point A to point B in terms of like my overall vision and kind of objectives in terms of how to actually grow the business itself. And I will tell you, one of the single greatest decisions around going off and starting this is starting this with somebody that I trust, that I have like the tightest relationship you can ever imagine, and making sure that you know I'm working with somebody that effectively is kind of the yin to my yang, right? At the end of the day, and so Art, if you're listening to this, I'm gonna tell you right now, you are the best business partner ever, right? Ever, you're the best friend ever, big brother ever, right? You are the man. And as we're recording this, happy birthday as well.
Happy birthday,
So,
Art.
so, you know, I'll tell you, when people talk about like, our business specifically and the evolution of it and the challenges, you know, people always, I think folks will go back to and say, well, hey, you guys are kind of like the David versus Goliaths right out there, right? We're a small firm, we're just getting going. You got some of the world's largest asset managers that went out and purchased businesses that focus in the space. But I think, us being small makes us a little bit more nimble and a little bit more flexible with working with folks, right? We can apply a little bit more of that personal touch. And for me specifically, the thing that I've also had to, come to terms with is sometimes it's more about getting the assist in a game than necessarily trying to,
Of
make a dunk,
course.
right? It's like you've got to know when to pass the ball to your other teammates and let them take the lead with things. And other times it's not often, but sometimes you've got to make sure that you advocate for things strongly enough where you can put things in the context of the bigger picture, right? The 50,000 foot view. And so, I think, those have been some of the things I've had to work through as challenges. I think obviously when you think about this business, like being an entrepreneur, right? Being an entrepreneur of color, you also have to kind of think about like, hey, what are the things that are naturally just from a factual standpoint, also going to make things challenging. When you think about finding the right investors, right? There's a challenge with that because um, not from a it's not a function. I don't think it's ever a function of race or anything else. I just think sometimes that people are comfortable with working with folks that they can directly relate to in a lot of instances, and so sometimes you have to be able to bridge that gap in a way where you can address people's concerns just like any and treat it as any other investor. You can't play that card of, oh, it's because of the X, Y, and Z why I'm not finding the right opportunities. Like, no, I don't ever believe in that. I think it's really a function of what's your game plan, right? How you approach everything, and can you be genuine, transparent, and honest with everyone towards what you're trying to accomplish. And so, look, I think for us, it's always been about trying to make sure we're nimble enough, we're flexible enough, we're creative enough towards, getting from point A to point B. And, at the same time, it's just being ourselves, right? We as a firm, we like to have fun. We believe that, again, everything in life doesn't have to be so
Of
serious,
course.
right? And my business partner Art, he reminds me of this all the time. I'm probably the more serious of the two, right? That's just kind of the way I am. I am wired that way, and I tell him like, look, I think about risk management every day. Like I think about probabilities in my head. Like I'm that guy, right? But in this business, you got to realize that to accomplish anything, whether you're a startup to you're running a company with billions of dollars in assets under management, it all comes back to connectivity with people, networking with people, building genuine relationships, and not looking at things as being so transactional.
Of course, of course. And transitioning from a less serious topic, right? Your
Yeah,
grandfather once said, "The only way to live a good life is when you are acting on your passion and emotion." What are you
yeah.
passionate about outside of work?
So my passions seem to be changing. I'm in a little flux right now. I'm going to be the first to admit that. But the single greatest thing I'm passionate about is my family. Um, my wife and I, we had our first daughter, our first kid ever, about a year ago.
Congrats.
Becoming a dad, it can change your perspective overnight. I joked with my wife because, like, I grew up in a family, it's all
Yeah.
boys, right? And if you have a brother, it's like there's a lot of that battling that happens over the years, and kind of what to expect, right? And for me, like having a daughter, I was like, girls, I don't know what to do with her, right? That was my first reaction, but it's been a blessing in that I she softened me up in a lot of ways, right? And I love seeing my daughter every single morning when I wake up. I love seeing all the things she does and how she progresses with her development. And I think when you become a parent, it just puts a lot of perspective on things that you thought were important. You're like, man, that wasn't really that important. Like that wasn't as big of a deal. Why did I get so worked up over that, right? And even like professionally, right? It just puts kind of a perspective on like, look, we're all out here grinding. We're all trying to do the things we need to do, but you know that personal life is even more important. Like you don't if you can find a way, don't sacrifice that because you don't get those moments back. So yeah, that's my biggest passion. I will tell you some of my other passions. So back on the fantasy football front, right? Just to bring it back for you, I have an innate belief that fantasy football is my proxy towards thinking about being a GM for a professional football team. And why do I say this? Every year before like the season starts up, I go through this whole process on like looking at stats, building out machine learning models, like all of it, the whole nine, like simulating drafts. I do all that every single year. And for me, it's more of like taking kind of my knowledge and insight from the investment world and applying it in a different form that can be a little bit more fun, right? I'm not worrying about, okay, hey, what's the inherent volatility of X, Y, and Z security? What does that mean towards kind of someone's money? It's like, oh, hey, like, is there some way for me to find undervalued players relative towards, aggregating performance each week in my fantasy football league, right? I always get the worst draft, like second to last in terms of draft grade every year. And then folks are like, where do you get points, man? It just doesn't, like, it's so weird, like how it all comes together. So that's kind of my second passion, what I love. And, I probably would say the third thing is I really, really, enjoy not just simply being outside, but I love running, right? I think I would tell anybody, especially, look, if you're about to hit 40, like I just turned 39, like don't take your health for granted. Do not take it for granted on so many levels, right? Because it can make all the difference in the world with you being here for the next, 50 to 60 years versus the next, 20 or 30, right? Or even less. And so, my passion really has been about, working out, getting in shape, staying in shape, doing all the things I need to do from a health perspective. You know, Especially for folks like us, I will tell you, like, look, I was scared a couple years ago, even the idea of like, hey, go get a colonoscopy and all these other things, right? Because, and hey, man, hey, if you haven't got it, get it done, right? That's all I'm going to say is get it done. It's scary, but like for me, what motivated me, I'll tell you, like just specifically on that topic, what motivated me to get that done was when I saw Chadwick Boseman die, and I like that came out of the blue. I never would have guessed that. And then talking with my own dad, he was like, "Well, hey, yeah, like that runs in our family. Like I get checked out like pretty frequently, right?" But like I bring that up, like just bring it back positive, right? Is that like my passion is about trying to take care of myself, health, working out, things like that, because it's you get old. Like again, perspectives change. I want to be able to make sure that I can give my daughter away for her wedding. I can be there for all those moments that are going to be important in her life, and just be the best example that I can be to her relative towards like what she should expect from other
and
people.
and that makes sense. And I have to be honest with you. I mean, my wife has been trying for a while to get me to get check up, right? And we had an appointment with a nurse practitioner, and boy, that was the quickest appointment I ever had. Boy, I walked out so quickly. I said, "Oh hell no!" Because it feels so invasive, right? At least just talking about it. I mean, you don't. I never had that experience. That, obviously you never. For those who never went through that experience, talking about it seems or looks very invasive. But just listen about your passion, though. Which revolves around family and obviously fantasy football and health, right? My final question for you, before we wrap this up, is especially around the family part, is what legacy do you want to leave behind?
I think a lot of people define legacy in a lot of different ways, right? Legacy could be monetary related. Legacy could be in terms of kind of acts, kindness or things that you do over your life. I would hope that my legacy is more about how many people I've helped along the way towards getting to their goals and dreams. I think that's far more important than any dollar number you can ever associate with doing anything else. And so for me, my biggest thing has always been about finding ways, and maybe this also, yeah, I think this does probably fit in another one of my passions too, is that I think it's important to reach out to the next generation and to find opportunities to mentor folks, right, who want mentorship, especially if they're looking to, find that path to Wall Street. It's not easy, right? I think that why that's important is that I look back at my entire career, right, and if it wasn't for a combination of the folks along the way who saw something in me to pull me forward, as well as getting an understanding through kind of trial and error on what it really takes to be successful, I don't think I would have done half the things that I probably can look back now and say that I actually was able to accomplish. And so I just think that it's important to just be involved, be there for people, be at minimum, someone that they can come and you can listen to them, right? Hear kind of what they're struggling with. And if they ask for your perspective, right, you can, share it in terms of like, hey, here's the things I went through. Here's the ways I thought about them, but my answer may not be, the right answer for you, right? But I'm here to listen, right? So I just hope more than anything, my legacy could just be more about how many other people that I've helped along the way to get to where they want to be.
Joe, well said. Thank you for taking the time to join us in today's episode. It was an absolute pleasure. I truly enjoyed listening to your story. Thank you for coming in.
No, I appreciate it, and thank you for having me on. So, we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely.
Maybe talk a little bit more football. A little bit more football.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Darren.
Thank you for joining us on Breaking Barriers of Black Investors. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower and uplift our community. Help us spread the word by sharing our podcast. Thank you for listening.